The Committee on Natural Resources will come to order. We are meeting today to hold the committee's Member Day hearing in accordance with HRS 8. We look forward to hearing testimony from members regarding issues within the committee's jurisdiction. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chair and ranking minority member or their designees. This allows us to hear testimony sooner and help members keep to their schedules. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all the members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted to the clerk by 5 p.m. today or the close of the hearing, whichever comes first. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Without objection, the chair may also declare a recess subject to the call of the chair. As described in the notice, statements, documents, or motions must be submitted to the electronic depository at hnrcdocs@mail.house.gov. Additionally, please note that as with in-person meetings, members are responsible for their own microphones. As with our in-person meetings, members can be muted by staff only to avoid inadvertent background noise. Finally, members or witnesses experiencing technical problems should inform committee staff immediately. I will now recognize myself for an opening statement. Thank you, members who have come to speak before us today. This committee has been entrusted with the broad and important task of safeguarding our nation's natural resources and heritage. The committee protects wildlife, public lands, and oceans, and seeks solutions to sustainably manage these resources, while supporting environmental health, responsible energy development, recreation, cultural sustenance, and communities under the threat of climate change. The committee also serves on behalf of Indigenous peoples and residents of U.S. insular areas and the many unique challenges facing these communities. I'm proud of the work done by our members and staff in these areas so far, but I recognize that these issues affect Americans in every district, and there is a lot of work to be done. It is critical that our legislative solutions consider the most diverse input possible to move us forward toward a cleaner and more equitable future. I'm eager to hear the testimony of my colleagues and learn more about their relevant priorities and concerns. So thank you again for your interest today. I now recognize Ranking Member Westerman for his opening statement.
Thank you, Representative Garcia, and also I want to say thank you to Chairman Grijalva for having this hearing where we get to get input from other members of Congress on their ideas on policy that actually affect the committee. You know, with the broad jurisdiction of the committee with energy and minerals and forests and fisheries and all the insular and Indian affairs issues that are out there, I believe there's got to be some common ground and some bipartisan bills that we can work on that are truly good for the country. And I hope that comes from today's hearing, that we hear those ideas and do as Congress is supposed to do, is to be a place where we hear ideas, we debate them, and try to make them better and do what's best for our country. I do appreciate the opportunity for all of us to meet so that we can speak on legislation that we've sponsored and the priorities that we have addressed that will affect the many natural resources issues facing our nation. I hope that today's hearing will lead to meaningful bipartisan discussion and actions that will strengthen our environment, conserve our natural resources, and put Americans back to work. In the spirit of bipartisanship, I urge us all to lean on innovation and the free market more so than over-regulating our domestic resources. Such burdensome measures have replaced beautiful forests with overstocked tinderboxes, tightened the strangling grip on the oil and gas industry, and actually given a leg up to our adversaries. One piece of bipartisan legislation that I think exemplifies Principles of Conservation and Innovation is H.R. 2639, the Trillion Trees Act, which I recently reintroduced. But I didn't reintroduce it by myself. It has 93 bipartisan co-sponsors. The bill is endorsed by over 50 stakeholder organizations. This bill has been improved since the last Congress. We listened to different groups, and I think this is a piece of legislation that we could really come together on in a bipartisan manner if we had the will to do that. This bill would improve our forests and establish the U.S. as a leader in the global 1 trillion tree initiative by incentivizing improved regeneration, management, and restoring 1 trillion new trees globally, which would sequester 205 gigatons of carbon, which is an amount equivalent to 2/3 of all man-made carbon released since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. As you all know, we currently have over 400 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere, and we must take action to address this. Natural climate solutions like the Trillion Trees Act look for common sense, practical, and innovative solutions to address environmental and economic challenges. We recently held a Republican forum on the bill in celebration of Arbor Day, where representatives from Walmart, the National Wildlife Federation, National Alliance of Forest Owners, and University of Idaho testified in strong support of the bill. I hope that the committee can hold an official hearing on this important bill soon so that we can begin the important work on meaningful conservation in America. Committee Republicans stand ready to undertake this responsibility, and I remain hopeful that we will be able to work with our Democrat friends to achieve the type of meaningful actions that are necessary to simultaneously address climate change and economic ills. I believe we have the opportunity to do that together, and I look forward to accomplishing such a meaningful goal. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I look forward to hearing the many ideas that will come out today, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Westerman, for your statement. We will now begin the testimony. A couple of housekeeping matters. Let me remind the witnesses that under our committee rules, they must limit their oral statements to 5 minutes, but that their entire statement will appear in the hearing record. I recommend that those joining remotely use the grid view so that they may pin the timer on their screen. Given multiple conflicts and busy schedules, members are permitted to provide their testimony and leave as needed. We will do our best to alternate between Democratic and Republican members and accommodate the various time constraints. Members of the committee are permitted to question witnesses following their statements, but out of consideration for our colleagues' time, I ask that you please keep your comments brief. I now recognize our first witness, the gentleman from California, Mr. Kastner, for 5 minutes. You may begin when you are ready, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate your efforts and members of the committee to listen to members, I think, make our most sincere comments with regards to challenges facing not only our congressional districts, but the regions we represent, as well as our country. There are a number of issues that I feel very strongly about. I've been a member of this committee for 17 years. And prior to that, I've been working on resource issues and water issues in California for more time than I care to count. But the fact is that there are a number of factors that I think have come together that create opportunities. First, I think most of us are clearly aware of the impacts that climate change is having, not only in our country and around the world, but certainly in the West and in California. We are now in another periodical drought period. And this is not new. This is the third drought we've had in 12 years. In the West and in California, it's either feast or famine. We have more water than we know what we can do with, or we are in extremely dry periods. The challenge of COVID-19 and the impacts it's had on our communities throughout the country have been severe. But our water resources are critical. And I think with the President's focus on investing in our infrastructure, because we have been living off the investments our parents and grandparents made a generation ago, we have opportunities to do some good bipartisan work. This committee holds jurisdiction over federal water infrastructure projects across our nation that are critical to conveying and delivering water to all of our communities. As we continue to see chronic hydrological drought conditions in the West, we must seek an all-of-above strategy. I yet like to say use all the water tools in our water toolbox. Flexibility and accessibility are a must if we're going to create resilient solutions to managing our resources. As California continues to see worse drought conditions each year, my legislation, HR 2552, the Canal, Conveyance, Capacity Restoration Act, funds repairs for 3 critical canals in California that convey water to cities, to farms, and to people who are most in need. The legislation will provide more than $653 million to fund repairs on 3 major canals from north to south in the state, an additional $180 million dedicated to restore salmon restoration, which is part of an agreement that we reached over 12 years ago on the San Joaquin River. These canals were built over a half-century ago. They're vital and pieces of water infrastructure responsible for carrying water for agricultural use and municipal use. Critical. Nobody should ever have to go without the accessibility to clean drinking water, and we have communities, sadly, that are in that state. In addition to restoring these canals, it will help improve California's drought resiliency combined with efforts that are going on in the state to comply with getting our groundwater back in balance. We have a very, very important Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, but unless the state and the federal government works together on these complex, difficult issues, we're never going to be successful in reaching that balance. So all of the above approach is critical. We have to use all the water tools in our water toolbox. Part of that effort, and we had a meeting earlier this week with Congressman Mike Thompson and others, is to better manage our forests. This goes back decades. We've done a poor job of managing our forests, and California has now decided to take a big effort in doing this. We need to match that in Western states. The horrific fires that we've had over the last 4 years have resulted in devastating impacts, but they've also reduced our ability to take advantage of our water resources in terms of recharge capability and ensuring that that we use every precious drop of water that we can. Clearly, we know that our snowpacks are varying and that we have to manage our water projects differently. But if we work together, which is always the difficult challenge, whether it's in California and other parts of the country, to take advantage of the President's desire to invest in infrastructure, there's some opportunities here in the near term to plan for the long term. And that's part of what this legislation and other pieces of legislation. I want to thank Chairman Huffman, working with him and his subcommittee on water, and Chairman Grovalva with the Natural Resources Committee, and I look forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony and your interest in the areas of concern to the committee. I now recognize our next witness, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Bost, for 5 minutes. You may begin when you're ready, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Garcia and Ranking Member Westerman. And thank you for the opportunity to testify on my bill that would establish the Cahokia Mounds Mississippian Culture National Park Historical Park. Southern Illinois is the home of one of America's history's greatest civilizations. It is in the center at Cahokia, and it was once the largest civilization in what is today the United States. By 12,000 AD, the community numbered 10,000 to 20,000 strong, and what remains today are the Cahokia Mounds, a 2,200 acre site with more than 70 earthen mounds upon where many of their buildings stood. This treasure is visited by schools, families, and history buffs alike. It's critical part of our history in this United States. And that's why I'm introducing the bill to make Cahokia Mounds a national park with my colleague, Corey Bush. That's why I introduced it 2 years ago, but we need to continue to work forward. The bill would help preserve this amazing piece of history for generations to come. The process to develop the legislation was long, and comprehensive. The Heartland Conservative District, based in my district, has undertaken a great effort to study the site for inclusion as a unit of the Park Service. This includes basing the legislation on criteria that the National Park Service would use in conducting a special resource study. The National Park Service itself appears to recognize the great importance of the Cahokia Mounds. In addition, the mounds are one of the few sites in the United States recognized by the United Nations World Heritage Sites. In short, the site's importance is well recognized already, and any recommendations to pursue a full special resources study would lead to unnecessary duplication of cost and delay. While I can appreciate my colleagues' desire to follow certain procedures, I ensure them to recognize both the uniqueness and of the Cahokia Mounds to the early history of our nation, and to recognize the work that has already been done and completed to make sure that a unit of National Park Service is appropriate. I want to thank you for holding this hearing today, and with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you so much, Representative Bost. You got my attention. I'm eager to sign up on that bill and join you and Representative Bush in being co-sponsors. I'd like to next recognize our next witness, the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Escobar, for 5 minutes. You may begin anytime.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Garcia, Ranking Member Westerman, and members of the Natural Resources Committee. I appreciate you giving me this opportunity to testify on some of my priorities for the committee. Today, I come before you in support of two very critical bills in the Natural Resources Committee's jurisdiction. H.R. 2752, the Kastner Range National Monument Act, and H.R. 2208, the Isleta del Sur Pueblo and Alabama Coushatta Tribes of Texas Equal and Fair Opportunity Act. I represent the 16th Congressional District of Texas in El Paso. We are home to Kastner Range, more than 7,000 acres of West Texas beauty located at Fort Bliss that has historical significance that dates back thousands of years. For decades, dedicated members of our community in El Paso have worked tirelessly to preserve Kastner Range and make it a national monument. In commemoration of Earth Day on April 22nd, and to honor the work and voices of my constituents, I introduced H.R. 2752, the Kastner Range National Monument Act. This bill would designate Kastner Range as a national monument to conserve and protect the ecological, cultural, historical, natural integrity of the land for present and future generations of El Pasoans and Americans to enjoy. As this crucial committee continues to work toward a 21st century conservation movement that is centered on justice, diversity, and equity, I hope you will give high consideration to advancing this bill and conserving Kastner Range, the crown jewel of West Texas and a source of great pride for El Pasoans. With your support, we can meet the moment by increasing equitable access to outdoor spaces and ensuring El Paso families and Americans everywhere can continue to make memories surrounded by the mesmerizing beauty and history of Kastner Range. I'd also like to ask the committee to support H.R. 2208, the Isleta del Sur Pueblo and Alabama Coushatta Tribes of Texas Equal and Fair Opportunity Act. Earlier this year, I introduced this bipartisan bill with Representative Tony Gonzalez of the Texas 23rd Congressional District to ensure the Isleta del Sur Pueblo and Alabama Coushatta Tribes are covered by the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, or IGRA, by providing Native American communities a critical economic lifeline and opportunity to recover from the coronavirus health and economic crisis. The Isleta del Sur Pueblo and Alabama Coushatta Tribes of Texas Equal and Fair Opportunity Act would create parity with the only other federally recognized tribe in Texas, the Kickapoo Traditional Tribe of Texas. With this bill, I hope this committee can join me in protecting our Native American tribes' sovereignty and ensuring that they have the ability to recover from the coronavirus crisis and rebuild their economies. In August 2020, the CDC released a study showing how Native American communities were disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Their communities suffered immensely because of long-term disinvestment and a lack of adequate access to healthcare and economic assistance. This bill is so simple. It seeks parity for these communities and creates long overdue opportunities for our tribes. I hope you will agree, amid this devastating pandemic, more must be done to protect our Native American tribes and their communities, now more than ever. Thank you for your time and your consideration of these vital pieces of legislation. I welcome any questions you might have, and I look forward to working with you on advancing these bills on behalf of our communities. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Escobar. Another great proposal to extol the great resources and inheritance that we have of our indigenous predecessors. I now recognize our next witness, the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Hill, for 5 minutes. Mr. Hill.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, so much for this Member Day. I'm grateful to you and to Ranking Member Westerman, my fellow Arkansan and good friend, for your continued hard work on conservation issues. And I want to thank the rest of the committee for their continued work on these matters in such a bipartisan manner over the past couple of Congresses. We all celebrate the Great American Outdoors Act. It was such a great benefit to our country and accomplished after a lot of work by leadership of this committee and the Congress. As a friend and a colleague, I'm particularly proud of Bruce Westman serving as the ranking member on this committee. He represents Hot Springs National Park, which just commemorates its 100th year anniversary. But I love the special place of Hot Springs, and it is our earliest federally protected recreation area dating back to Andrew Jackson days in 1832. So Bruce, it's a pleasure to work with you, and thanks for your leadership. I've always continued to work to enhance our natural resources, and one way of doing that is properly recognizing the conservationists who've made strides over many, many decades in the preservation and upkeep of our parks, our rivers, and our forests. In 2022, we'll celebrate the 50th anniversary of the first nationally recognized national river in the United States, the Buffalo National River, signed into law by President Nixon in 1972 and authored by our Arkansas predecessor, Congressman John Paul Hammerschmidt. One marker for this golden anniversary is my bill, H.R. 2091, the Dr. Neil Compton Conservation Act. This legislation would recognize Neil Compton's singular leadership in protecting the Buffalo River as a truly extraordinary natural resource in our country. As I said, I've been a long time outdoorsman and conservationist, and I believe in pragmatic approaches to maintaining our parks and forests. In Arkansas, we have the Ouachita Mountains and the Ouachita National Forest, and there's a wilderness area called Flatside Wilderness, named for Flatside Pinnacle, which rises on its eastern edge. With your help and guidance in 2019, my bill, the Flatside Wilderness Enhancement Act, was passed and signed into law and added acreage, which is named the Bethune Woods for our former congressman from the 2nd District in Arkansas, Ed Bethune, who authored that original wilderness legislation back in 1994. In addition to the Bethune Woods addition, I work with our senior senator from Arkansas, John Bozeman, and we included a study of additional Forest Service lands adjacent to Flatside, which was signed into law on February 15, 2019. After receiving this study from the U.S. Forest Service, I'm pleased to learn that some of these forest lands may well be considered eligible for further inclusion to Flatside Wilderness. I look forward to working with the committee on legislation to consider these additional acres and their preservation for future generations. Additionally, I'd like to give my thanks to the committee for working on civil rights grants through the National Park Service and the Historic Preservation Fund. This included in Arkansas 2nd District, Triborian Hall, which was completed in 1918 and became a centerpiece for the African American community in Central Arkansas. During its heyday, it showcased musical greats like Ray Charles, Louis Armstrong, and B.B. King. I commend the National Park Service for allocating $500,000 for the renovation and preservation of this historic site. And finally, I'd like to thank the committee again for working on a bipartisan basis on these important conservation and climate-related issues. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the time and for my friend, the ranking member, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Hill, for your testimony. Next, I want to recognize our next witness, the gentleman from California, Mr. Valadao. Mr. Valadao, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, Chairman Garcia, Ranking Member Westerman, and members of the committee.
Camera's not nearly as good as one supposed.
Thank you for the opportunity to highlight the importance of my legislation, H.R. 737, the Responsible No-Cost Extension to the Western Water Infrastructure Improvements Act, otherwise known as the Renew WIN Act. The Renew WIN Act would extend the general and operations provisions of Subtitle J of the Water Infrastructure Improvements for the Nation Act, or better known as the WIN Act, and extend the provision requiring consultation on coordinated operations of the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project. The legislation would also extend the authorization of appropriations for water storage projects that the Secretary of Interior finds feasible. Passage of this legislation is especially urgent given the worsening drought conditions in California. This drought is already so severe that in February of this year, the Bureau of Reclamation announced a mere 5% water supply allocation for south of Delta agriculture, repayment, and water service contractors. That 5% allocation immediately worried our farmers in the Central Valley, unsure how they would be able to continue to put food on the tables of Americans with so little water. Only 1 month later, the Bureau of Reclamation amended the allocation decision and now is on hold until further notice. We are faced with a grim, dry forecast that does not look to improve anytime soon. So the hold might as well be an allocation of 0%. Water conservation and scarcity is already a daily reality for my constituents. We all know we cannot make it rain, and we cannot produce water out of thin air. We have to work with the water we already have and apply common sense solutions to make this water available to communities that need it by doing everything possible to survive yet another drought. But it is not possible for my constituents' farms and livelihoods to survive on nothing. Communities in my district are suffering because of a lack of action in Congress. Unfortunately, this is not an issue exclusive to my district or even exclusive to California. The Central Valley has the most agriculturally productive land in America. Our farmers feed not only our communities across the United States, but also across the world. Californian farmers and producers grow more than 1/3 of the vegetables and 2/3 of the fruit and nuts produced in the United States. Depriving our farmers of water they need to grow our nation's food ultimately increases the cost of food for every person in the United States. For these reasons, I am astonished that the majority on the Natural Resources Committee has yet to take action to address the drought in California or consider legislation like Renew WIN that will bring clean, reliable water to suffering families and to the farms our entire nation relies on for food. The Renew WIN Act is a no-cost, common-sense piece of legislation that simply extends authorizations for operations and storage and provides us with more time to potentially consider additional meaningful legislation related to water storage and delivery. I understand that as members of Congress, we are tasked with reviewing countless number of important issues. Every issue our constituents care about is obviously important. We are also tasked with prioritizing these issues, and it is irresponsible of the committee to fail to prioritize finding solutions to real suffering of hardworking Americans, particularly those in severe drought that is taking place in real time with lasting and damaging consequences. Refusing to conduct hearings concerning the drought, or at the very least, include the topic of California's drought in hearings is insulting. At the same time, keeping critical legislation, including my bill, the Renew WIN Act, off the agenda directly harms my constituents. And by the way, increased food costs, it also harms all of your constituents as well. I cannot express enough importance of expediting passage of the Renew WIN Act and having honest, transparent conversations regarding the California drought crisis. We cannot wait. California families cannot wait. Our farmers cannot wait. And I implore you to prioritize the needs of the people, prioritize the families that are being devastated by the drought, and prioritize common sense solutions to deliver water to the disadvantaged, struggling communities in the Central Valley. Not only my constituents, but all of our constituents need your immediate efforts on this matter. Thank you again for giving me the opportunity today to highlight the importance of my new legislation. I hope you will consider holding a legislative hearing on the Renew Wind Act in the near future. Thank you again for your time, and I yield back.
Thank you for your testimony, Representative Valadao. I next will recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Rutherford, for 5 minutes. Please proceed, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Garcia, and Ranking Member Westerman. Good to see you, Bruce, and all the committee members. Thank you for this opportunity, and you're hearing my testimony today. I'm here to ask that you consider my bill, H.R. 2107, which is the nation's oldest port National Heritage Area Act. This bill would establish a National Heritage Area in Northeast Florida that would run all the way from the Atlantic coast of the St. Mary's, where the St. Mary's is, from the Florida-Georgia line down to Flagler County, referred to many as the First Coast. And this stretch of Florida is home to some of the nation's, it is the nation's oldest city, St. Augustine. Beautiful landscapes and literally thousands of years of human history. Establishing a National Heritage Area here would help preserve and celebrate these diverse groups that have called the First Coast home, from the Native Americans of North Florida to the settlers in St. Augustine, the nation's oldest city. We had the Timucuan, the Crete, the Seminole, many more. It also has, interestingly, the first settlement of free African Americans at Fort Mose, just north of St. Augustine. This area, so you can see this area truly is a mosaic of cultures that has been shaped by its maritime heritage. This bill would support public-private partnerships that promote conservation, history preservation, recreation, and heritage tourism. This bill is a culmination of years of grassroots work. The nation's oldest port National Heritage Area is supported by mayors, city councils, county commissions, local chambers of commerce, and many other organizations, several from multiple subsidiary government units. These grassroots groups have collaborated and worked with the National Park Service to complete a very impressive feasibility study that outlines the history of the area and its many historic sites, some of which I mentioned earlier. This bill has extensive support in the area encompassed in the NHA. In fact, in the last Congress, it received bipartisan support from most of the Florida delegation as well. And it's my hope that this committee will take up this important bipartisan bill that will, number one, create jobs, number two, support the local economy, and number three, preserve the stories and the history of the inhabitants that really built Florida's First Coast and were the first and longest European settlement in North America. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Representative Rutherford. This concludes our list of scheduled witnesses. I'd like to thank my colleagues who delivered oral testimony, as well as those who submitted written testimony for their valuable input. If there is no further business, without objection, the committee stands adjourned.